Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friday. You are joining Find My Past Family History Expert Hour, and we are so excited. We've got some great stuff coming up for you, so stick around and stay with us to talk about all things family history. Hey, everybody, welcome to our brand new version of Find My Past Fridays. We're so excited to kind of give this all a little bit of a refresh and do something a bit different with everybody. We hope that you have had a fantastic week. So my name is Jen Baldwin. I'm the research specialist for Find My Past, and we're very excited to have you with us. We have a load of stuff to talk about today. This is our first Family History Expert Hour. So last week, if you joined us, you saw Ellie and Liam doing a little bit more of a casual talk, but I got to participate. That was fun. Learned a bit about Elvis. I'm still actually thinking about some of those things in the back of my mind. And we're going to alternate with them. We're going to start doing kind of these a little bit more kind of, I don't know if you want to call them, they're not advanced, but in more in depth, I suppose, more kind of um, like taking time to really dig into a question or a something. So that's what these expert hours are going to be about. But we're also going to talk about new records, and we're going to do our question of the week, and we're going to engage with all of you guys and check in on your research. We have Ellie today in the comments, so please say hello to Ellie, everybody. She is hard at work from a cafe because for some reason they turned her internet off today. So thank you so much for being with us. And let's see, we've already got lots of people with us. So Andrea and Jillian and Daphne and Georgia and Lynn and Liam. Hi, Liam. And Gina's with us, and Kim is with us, of course. Jean, I'm reading all your comments as I go. So, and Andrea, and and Metal's going home. Hey, it's great to have you with us. You must have heard about our topic this week. Rosie's with us, and Jenny and Linda's watching over on YouTube, and Christine. Oh, from California. Excellent. Rosie's here. I think I got just about everybody. That's exciting. Jeff is with us. Thank you all so much for being with us. So, if you have watched these sessions before, you know that we're doing things a little bit differently. And we'd love your feedback. So if you have comments about how we're gonna work through the hour together, please do let us know. But we'd like to know, if you guys are liking our new plan here. Right. So today we have, of course, a lot to talk about. We always do. We are going to do, of course, our question of the week, which is going to be around living memory. Just to cue that up a little bit, we're going to look at new records and newspapers for the last 2 weeks. And then we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into some of the research for our Finding Eli video that we released a couple months ago. If you haven't seen it yet, I would encourage you to watch. It's kind of cool. It's kind of like a "Who do you think you are" type setup, where we take someone from the community and we do research for them and take them to all these individual locations. And in this particular story, we were looking at a World War I soldier whose life was completely changed and altered by the war. Of course, so many were impacted in that way, but we really want to think about how we found out that information and kind of where that injury happened and how we got to the conclusions that we got. Um, right. So that's what we're going to do today. Still just reading through your comments as well. So, are you ready for the question of the week? I bet you are. Question of the week is kind of an easy one to answer at first, but then there's a secondary part that might bring out some good stories, I think, today. So our question this week is, how many generations have of your family have you known personally? So your grandparents, maybe your great grandparents. How far back can you actually say, yes, I met that human being in my life? And then have you researched them? And of course, the subsequent part of that, right? If you can all read my mind, is what did you learn, right? Did you get anything new about them um, that you didn't know before, particularly in part of like, what your relationship with them, right? And this all leads into our content for today, of course. And so we'll talk more about this as we get in further into the hour. So respond with our QOTW acronym if you don't mind in the comments, and we'll watch for those to come in. And thanks, Ellie, for posting the question in the thread. I know you're still there. All good. Thanks. All right, let's go through new records. So 2 weeks ago, we did a big update to our Catholic collection, specifically England and Scotland, although we did add a few more from Philadelphia as well. But England, particularly, covers records now up to 1914. So that's Birmingham, Westminster, Southwark, Leeds, Northampton, and Nottingham. And then Scotland, we added baptisms up to 1914, marriages up to 1949, and burials up to 1974. And you're going to see that kind of differentiation on this week's records as well. And I want to take a second to just explain why that is, in case people are curious. There is privacy restrictions on the records that we can publish. And some of those privacy restrictions are dictated by national law. Some of them are dictated by the archive themselves. So in this instance, we can publish English records from the Catholic Church up to 1914, 100 years ago. In Scotland, we can publish baptisms from 100 years ago, but not 99 years ago. But we can do marriages a little bit more recently, and we can do burials up to quite recent, right, 1974. That is all determined by primarily the archive that we're working with. So you might see a change of range or years, and it might depend as well on location. So obviously England and Scotland are a little bit different, but it's a different again in the United States or in Canada as an example, right? So in the UK, the general rule is 100 years, but in the United States, the census is released after 72 years. So you might get something different in terms of scope and scale of what we can publish, based on location, based on the preferences of the archive, based on the sensitivity of the material. So there's all those kinds of um, there's all those kinds of nuances, I suppose, when we publish new records. Something that we all obviously manage all the time, but I'm not sure that we communicate that to our customers and our community very often. So really thinking about how we publish records and what we can actually make available to the general public, right? Okay, so that is the Catholic record update, but I'm glad it gave us an excuse to kind of talk through that a little bit. Last week's news. Oh, I did this in a different order. This week's new records, sorry about that, come from 3 different main counties in England. So we have updates to collections for vital events or BMDs. So Buckinghamshire, baptisms and marriages, Kent, baptisms, marriages, and burials, and then the same in Somerset as well, except they're deaths, not burials. And again, you see that kind of variation on the year range. You see baptisms for Buckinghamshire, well, for all 3 counties actually, up to 1924. Baptisms are almost always just a static 100 years, no matter what we're talking about. And then marriages, 1939 or 1940. And then in this case, Kent and Somerset actually both have different rules as well. So Kent is burials up to 1999. Somerset is up to 1998. So it's a really good example, just these 2 weeks together, of how that variation happens and why it happens. So just a little tip out there for you. If you're looking for, a baptism from 1925, you have 1 more year to wait, right, for some of those records. So as you are doing your research, it's a good thing to kind of be aware of and know about, especially on something quite linear, like baptisms or birth records are almost always 100 years in England. So you can kind of count on that, right? And of course, we have the civil registration system that we can rely on. But if you're looking for the parish records, it might be a little bit different. Okay. So then let's go into new newspapers. So we have done a couple new titles in the last 2 weeks, but lots of updated titles. 2 weeks ago, last week, getting myself confused already. We've added the Whitley Bay Guardian, and you see a variety of years on the screen there. I'm not going to read those out, but an opportunity to go into that region. I will also note that I believe this is the title where Rose's sister becomes famous because she is found in the record in the newspaper. We haven't found Rose in here yet, though. Keep looking. And 17 new updated titles as well. We're going to share links to the blog posts where you can get all the details. The blog post for the newspaper is particularly important because number one, it kind of delves into why that newspaper is special, but also tells you all of the newspapers that we updated. So 17 new titles is kind of hard to put on a slide like this. But if you really want the details to see what you can now research, the best way to do that is through the blog. So we're gonna add blog post links to the new records posted and the new newspapers for you guys. And I'm still trying to read. I'm trying to. I'm getting distracted by long comments, and I'm like, oh, I want to get into those, but I have at least one more slide. Okay, so that was last week's new papers. This week has some really cool stuff. Again, one new title. It's called Chad. It's from Alfreton, 1989 to 2002. And I found this lovely picture was included on the blog post that Rose pulled together. Thank you, Rose, for all of your hard work on newspapers. And of course, it is the famous Harry Houdini. And what might you ask would Harry Houdini have to do with a very modern newspaper title, right? 1989 to 2002. Well, you will have to read the blog post to find out. There is a very good and very interesting connection. Rose did all that research and told us that story on the British Newspaper Archive blog. So make sure you go read it if you are interested in that kind of thing. I definitely am. I think, um, this kind of comparison, especially, I mean, the two people being discussed in that blog post are, a number of years apart, and it's just always fun to see it all come back up. We also did 21 updated titles this week as well on the newspaper collection. Again, too many to list on the screen, but we do hope that you will go see the blog and see what it's all about. And Ellie already shared those blog posts, so thanks. Yes, she did. Look, and I just scrolled right by it. All right, thanks, Ellie. Okay, let's talk about question of the week. And I have seen some good ones. I'm going to scroll back up to the top and see what y'all are saying. Right. So just in the order they came in on my screen. Shirley, oops, where'd it go? Oh, I lost Shirley's comment already. There we go. Shirley said she knew her grandmother, who knew her as a baby, but of course she can't remember her. We have Ergo saying just my parents, actually, not my grandparents or great grandparents. Sue, latest I met was my Irish grandmother, but I was small and don't remember any conversations. So that's 2, I think. And she has researched her and back to 1740. So that's good. Jenny, being the child of older parents, I unfortunately only knew my 2 grandmothers. Both of my grandfathers died before I was born. One of them died the day after my parents' wedding. Oh, my husband has that in his family. His grandfather died, not a wedding, but the day before he was born, or the week before, something like that, very, very close in time. Gina, I think I've only met my grandparents and they seemed a bit secretive and wouldn't even reveal their Christian names, telling us it was bad manners. Oh, wow. Wow. Okay. My grandma, so I have my genealogy grandma, right? The person who got me going. I've always thought was very kind of rigid and strict, and she was delightful in her own way, and I loved her very much. But I've always thought of her as quite stern. But even she didn't set that line, Gina. So that's yeah, that's interesting. Bad manners to ask a name. Interesting. Okay. Rosie saying, maternal grandmother as a small child began searching with her as that was the side of the family I started with as I knew the most, had lots of photos and memoriam cards, etc. Kim saying, just my parents and one grandma. Earliest memory was tripping over her wheelchair and dad saying he'd sue her and her balloon chair. Oh no. Oh, Kim. That sounds very American. I'm just gonna put that out there. Andrew, only as far back as my grandmother's. Both grandfathers died before I was born, but I have great nephews and great nieces, 5 generations, and of course, research everybody. So let me tell you a little bit about why I asked this question today. Actually, so it's relevant to our topic today in terms of living memory. but it's also relevant to kind of the internal goings on at Find My Past. So every month we do a session with our entire staff on genealogy research. Right, we kind of come up with a case study and some exercises, and our colleague Eva puts a lot of work into this and a lot of time, and she is prepping for next month's session, and she has been gathering data on living memory and when generations were living in the year range and that kind of thing. And so your responses are actually going to help inform our next kind of internal genealogy training program. So thank you for answering the question. We won't use any names or exact details. We're just going to get kind of a general idea of who knew their grandparents and who didn't. Ellie coming in strong. She knew 3 generations: parents, 3 grandparents, 1 great grandparent. Paternal grandfather died when my dad was 2. My great granny was born in 1913, died when I was about 12. All right. Yeah, Ellie, you might you might be beating everybody. It's not a competition, but you might be. Ellen saying my great grandmother was I met great grandmother as a very small child, barely remember her. Have done research on her family. I'm wondering how your research impacts you in this case, right? Like, so my grandma is the one who really kind of got me pushed into all of this, and the same woman I was talking about just a minute ago. And I of course remember her as grandma, but when I started researching her life, and especially her life kind of like as a teenager, or her high school, yeah, last years of public school, and then kind of into her marriage and thing, I learned a lot about her as an individual woman, and changed my perspective a little bit about my grandmother. So it's always fun to kind of go back and research those people, even that are really close to us, because we get a different view of them, right? Instead of just grandma, we see them as kind of a young adult, right, or that kind of situation. I think that's always a very interesting path to go down. Janet says paternal grandparents died before I was born, so only really knew my maternal ones. My great grandmother met me, but I was only 5 months old when she died. Haven't really researched them as I knew so much already. Yeah. Oh, because late mother wrote down so much family history. Well, that's handy, isn't it, Janet? Um, Daphne saying, from personal memory, only both grandmothers. What did I find out? Rose tinted glasses played a big part in my maternal grandma. Is kind of what I was just talking about, right? I think she liked fudge because she was always fudging the truth. Oh, wow. That's good. That's really good, Daphne. And well said. Well said. All right, let's do a couple more, and then I'm going to go into kind of a little bit of our case study, and we'll finish up with some of these at the end. Georgia, only my maternal grandparents who both died when I was in my early teens, so knew them well. My paternal grandmother died when I was 5, so I did not know her for long. No one further back, sadly. I have researched their ancestors, so okay, that's good. Oh, and Kim kind of coming in with another comment saying, hers always hid the truth, made it difficult to research. Yeah. I think there was a lot that my grandmother's generation definitely put kind of a lot like under the rug, right? And just we don't talk about that. And like, we're not going to acknowledge that truth. Um, some surprises in there. There was some surprises in there for me too. Um, Jillian, my parents' mothers. So my dad's dad died when dad was only 12 years old, a month before his 13th birthday. Oh, that's sad. His brother, Uncle Bill, was 17 at the time and at college. My mom's mother was never married. She never talked about my mom's dad, so we never knew who he was. Yeah, that's like a whole family tree of mystery, isn't it? That's a lot. Okay. Let's do one more. Rena, only 2 generations. My father was the second to last child of 9 children. Yeah, those big families. And my mother was the youngest of 3 to older parents. My parents didn't have children until they were older. I've researched everyone in each generation. Fantastic. Okay, let's talk then. Let's kind of segue a bit into our session for the day. And one of the reasons why I asked this question today, of course, is because of what I wanted to talk about today. So when we do our finding videos, we kind of go out and we say, what question would you want us to answer in this research if you were picked for the video? And the person that we worked with for the Finding Eli video, her name was, sorry, I'm trying to click and talk at the same time. Her name was Laura. And this is one of the things that she told us. She said, the ancestor I'm interested in finding out about is my great grandfather, Eli Henry Collins. particularly interested in his World War I experiences. He lost an arm during the war, and I've been told it was at Somme, but I'm not sure if that is correct. And this kind of segues nicely, right? It's this idea that you have a memory of this person, even if you never met them, right? You have stories, you have an impression of that person. And sometimes the challenge for us is actually determining what's true and what's not, right? What bits of that oral history actually are fact based and which are misremembered or intentionally hidden away or whatever the case may be. So Laura came to us with this question, and really wanted to know more about her ancestor Eli. So that was the whole kind of research objective from the very beginning for this particular case. Um, so first, we need to introduce you a little bit to Eli, especially if you haven't seen the video. So Eli Collins is the son of Frederick and Elizabeth Collins. He was born in 1896 in Bristol. Um, Pretty easy to find them in the 1901 1911 census. They show the family kind of around that downtown Bristol area, several siblings in the household. In 1911, Eli is working at a local restaurant. He is a young man, a teenager at that point. His father, Frederick, is a carter. Elizabeth, the mother, kind of occasionally works as a laundress, bringing in some extra money, but nothing outside the home. And they did have several children. I want to say there was 7 or 8 kids. Plenty to do at home anyway. Eli, of course, when the war breaks out, he enlists pretty quickly. He actually enlists in. Trying to click. There we go. He enlists in the Gloucestershire Regiment. It is a aligned infantry in the British Army, formed originally in 1881. And I'm sharing this. This is because this is essentially the piece of background information that we always cultivate first. So when I sit down with a new project, no matter what the work is for, there's always a bit of like learning about that thing before you ever start looking at records, right? So in this case, I knew that he enlisted, found some of his military records right away. So I knew exactly what unit he enlisted in right away. And so the first thing I need to do as a researcher is understand what that unit was all about, where they were stationed, how they participated in the war. So during World War One, they had 18 battalions that were raised. 16 of them saw active service on the Western Front, France and Flanders, and then kind of all elsewhere as well. So Italy, Egypt, Persia, etc. Eli's unit was the 1st Battalion, and it was assigned to the 3rd Infantry Brigade, the 1st Infantry Division at the outbreak of the war, and they were deployed in August of 1950. If that last sentence didn't make sense to you, that's a really good place to start with your World War I ancestor, is understanding how the British Army actually worked, and what that hierarchy looks like, and why all of those elements could be relevant to your research at some point, right? Having that information kind of in your head in advance is easier, in my opinion, than finding it down the road and going, I don't really know what that means, and having to backtrack. So I always do kind of that initial scope of information at the start of a project versus at the end or in the middle. So during Eli's time with the unit, the 1st was involved in a number of major battles, right? You can see many of them on the screen. And we do know that they were involved in the Somme, which starts 1st of July, 1916, right? And goes all the way through November. And apologies if I mispronounce some of these locations. I'm not very good with some of these just yet. I'm still working on my World War I history from a UK perspective. So the unit is very much involved in all of these. So right away going in, we think it is feasible that Eli was involved in one of these major battles, and then of course ends up being injured at one of these, just like the family suspects. So we immediately get into newspaper and military content. Newspapers are wonderful for military records, especially because during this period, they almost always publish the service number, right, alongside the name. So we know, right, in our first very early scope of the records, the Gloucester Journal lists him a couple of times. So they list him on 30th of October 1915, a member of the 1st Battalion, Gloucestershire Regiment, as being wounded. He was given the 1914-15 star. He had a disembarkation date of 20th of January 1915 from Western Europe. Okay. We know he was wounded a second time. He's listed again as wounded on the 22nd of January 1916 in the Gloucester Journal. Now, these are publication dates. Okay, this is the date of the newspaper. This is not necessarily the date of the injury, of course, because it takes time for that information to be processed through the army, up their official paperwork trail, and then into the media stream over in England. If we go into his military records, we can see again he's awarded the British War Medal and the Victory Medal for his services in the 1st Battalion. He is a private, and that, of course, that regiment number kind of just follows him around wherever he goes, of course. We also know that he received the Civil War Badge in 1920, of course, after the war. And the register indicates his enlistment date and his discharge date. So we have a specific enlistment date of the 6th of September 1914 and a discharge date due to wounds 11th October 1916. And it does indicate that he served overseas. So initial sweep of records, we're already off to a really good start. He did receive a pension. His pension started in 1916, and the last payment date is 1923, and it lists him in Eton, Bristol. So all very good and helpful information. Now, I would note that that is one of the longer pensions that I have personally seen in my research. So an indication that the injury is probably fairly significant, right? There is some reason. The British Army at this point is pretty stingent with pensions, right? They're not giving out pensions in a very haphazard way, right? You really had to qualify in a very specific way to receive a pension, and he clearly did because his runs through 1923. But of course, we know his life has completely changed, right? We know from his great granddaughter already that he has lost an arm during the war. And that is hugely impactful, right? So he was one of the thousands of men who came home without a limb. The First World War saw more than 700,000 British soldiers receive limb wounds, and more than 41,000 underwent amputations. Becomes one of the largest amputee cohorts in history, recorded history. And historians estimate that up to 33,000 of them would have potentially experienced post amputation pain. So we're really talking about something that is absolutely life changing, and it's more than just the physical loss, right? I'm holding my shoulders and my arms as if I can feel it. It's more than just the physical loss. It's a complete adaptation to life again, right? It's learning how to write and how to work and how to do basic things, how to get dressed. If it was a leg, you're relearning how to walk. All of those things, right? That rehabilitation process is the physical process is long and takes a long time, but the mental and emotional toil and really the physical toil never goes away, right? So you know that if you are getting an amputated limb during military service at this point, you know that it is pretty disastrous. And I'm trying not to use words that sound like I'm exaggerating, but that's genuinely true, right? Um, um, so yeah, so Eli, none of his records actually indicate where the injury takes place or when. Of course, we can say that it's probably the second injury because if he lost an arm in the first injury, then he wouldn't have been sent back to the trenches, right? He would have been sent home on that first injury. But but we still have to kind of determine exactly what the circumstances were around that injury. So that's still the objective that we have in our mind. But in the meantime, we need to learn a little bit more, right? So um, his recovery process and his rehabilitation almost certainly would have been at Queen Mary's Hospital at Roehampton, often referred to just simply as Roehampton. It was founded in 1915 as a military hospital, specifically to provide care for these wounded soldiers. It's initially based at Roehampton House, and it's in the London area. They specialize in the care of amputees, and they soon become kind of world leading in terms of amputee and fitting of prosthetics. They actually build a fully equipped hospital on the site in the early 1920s. They have a facility in the basement where they actually create and innovate around prosthetics. So it is a leading facility internationally. Also, they work with plastic and oral surgery. That moves onto the site in 1925, and then they added a tropical disease unit for the former prisoners of war from World War II in the 1940s. Roehampton opens with only 25 beds. But by the end of the war, they had 900 beds in place. So they're able to house 900 wounded at any time. It's the largest in the UK, both during and after the war. And at one point, they actually had so many soldiers there that they had built tents and huts on the grounds to kind of house the patients. So the facility increases and gets bigger and bigger and bigger in a pretty rapid pace. All of this to say this is the place where Eli certainly would have recovered, right? Not only is it the largest in England, but he is from Bristol. And so it's the closest facility to kind of his home as well. So there's a facility like this in Scotland, but they most certainly would have sent him to Roehampton. Roehampton, of course, is covered thoroughly in the newspaper collection. A- and and again, it's because of this sense of being maimed, right? Of losing the limb, right? So in conflicts previous to World War One, something like this may losing a limb would have probably resulted in like begging on the street, and really becoming a nuisance to society. But World War One, the attitude changes and shifts. Christian charities are popping up all over the place. Facilities like Roehampton are being built. Housing specifically for soldiers with amputated limbs are being built. They're trying to find jobs for people. Right, part of the process at Roehampton was that before you left, you were they made sure that you had some kind of work that you could go into as you're leaving the facility. So this idea of the British soldier, right, and the British man in this period of having to try and be um, the respectable man, stiff upper lip, like that whole persona of British males at this point is very much in play, and this attitude towards amputation is pretty severe, right? People saying, "I would rather die than lose a limb." Um, this the concern, of course, is that your life never goes back to normal. There's kind of this constant fear of infection from the wound. There's ongoing pain. You become kind of this social and economic outcast. It's hard to provide for your family, for yourself. It brings this fear of rejection. It meant you were really unable to participate fully in post-war Britain, right? In that sense, that soldiers really feared being maimed more than death. And that is important context for the research that we are conducting, right? All of this I'm saying not because I think it's interesting, but because it matters to the story we're trying to tell. It matters to the reality of what Eli's life was. And so, with all of this in your brain, the next record that I show you might surprise you a little bit, because here is a man who is concerned that his life will never be normal again, right? Who's really, really unsure about what his future is. And so, the idea of a long-term relationship is maybe not quite in his mind. But here he is getting married, and he gets married just months after he gets home from that injury. So Eli marries a Lucy Jane Nash on the 28th of January, 1917. And I've circled the address. They both have the same address listed as their residence. It's 50 First Avenue in Mortlake, which is in the London area. Now, the reason that this is significant, I think, is because Lucy spends her entire life in London. There's no evidence that she ever lived anywhere else. Eli spends his entire life in Bristol. No evidence that he ever lived anywhere else. So the most likely conclusion is that they met while he was at Roehampton. And I'll show you why in just a second, and why this address is so important. So here is a very young couple. They're both 20 years old. They know that their future together is going to be extremely difficult because he has lost his arm, and they get married anyway. And that to me makes Eli and Lucy heroes, right? Lucy is just as much a part of this story, I think, as Eli. Lucy becomes his real life partner, right? This has got to be a really substantial, very strong relationship. The bond must have been incredible, right? Um, and it just strikes me as just like a really substantial piece of the story, right? The that Eli and Lucy together as a team must have just been an incredible power and an incredible force to watch. Now, here's why her address is so important, because it turns out that 50 First Avenue Mortlake is less than 2 miles from Roehampton. So, and that is in today's terms, this is not as the crow flies, right? This is like walking on the proper streets. It's actually probably a little bit shorter to get back and forth. this to me just really speaks to, again, just this idea of how brave they both were to kind of take on this life together. Of course, for Eli, it would have been like maybe possibly a bit of a relief, but for Lucy, we're really talking about something that is a huge, huge decision. And she would have known what she was going into, and so would have her father, right, and her parents. So that is a substantial moment, I think, in their life. Okay. So then we find them in the 1921 census, of course. They have now moved to Bristol. They're back to Eli's stomping grounds. And notably, right, in the 1921 census, there's no children yet. They do obviously go on to have children. But Eli is listed as the head of household. He's working as a news agent on his own account. So he actually does well for himself from a career perspective. But you'll see that Lucy is the one who actually fills out the census and signs on the line at the bottom. And again, significant, right? Because we know he has lost an arm, and so this is probably a reflection of his status at rehabilitation, right? He was not yet at the point where he felt like he could fill out the census for the family as head of household, which most certainly would have been the thing that was expected for him to do. But she ends up doing it, and she's the one who signs. And that is again kind of something that we can kind of feed into that the status, the situation, the relationship as a whole. It kind of informs kind of all of those kinds of angles. Right, but let's get back to the question at hand, which is really where and when did Eli's injury actually take place? So we know it wasn't his first injury, but we're gonna work through both of those events just to showcase kind of how we can pinpoint some of those details. And there are other ways to do this. I'm just going to show you maybe the two options that we did in this particular instance. This is certainly not the only route to success here, but it is one way to think about war injuries. So the first thing, that first injury, again, the newspaper published the information on the 30th of October, 1915. So one of the first things I did was go to the war diary for that unit and look at what was happening in the month of October of 1915. What were they involved in? Where was the place and the time that he was most likely to be injured? Well, it actually turns out that October was a fairly quiet month for this particular unit. They did see some action on the 13th of October, 1915. They were part of an assault on German trenches as part of the Battle of Loos. They were ordered to throw smoke bombs, which drew pretty considerable artillery reply. So we know that there was a pretty significant engagement on the 13th. The unit war diary records 5 killed and 45 wounded from other ranks, which would, of course, included privates. Now, war diaries do not list names of people unless it's someone very high up in rank. But something like this, 45 wounded from other ranks, they're not going to sit and list all of those men individually. There are other documents through the army that do that for them. The war diary is exactly what it sounds like. It is a record of day-to-day events for that particular unit. Um, so we know that from the war diary, the most likely day of this injury is the 13th of October. We did go back and verify that, but and I'll show you that in just a second how we might do that. But it's to point out one of the reasons I wanted to include this is to point out the war diaries and their usefulness, right? So it's more than just descriptions of battles. It really does give you a sense of what that unit was experiencing. That is the case I worked on last year that had several entries around Christmas Day. And the person filling out the diary had written in the diary 3 or 4 times on Christmas Day itself. And then the person I was researching ended up dying like a month later as a result of his wounds. And so you kind of backtrack and you go, well, that was his last Christmas. And it was significant because here's all of these things that this unit in particular did. And they had some conflict that they faced that day. But they also had, kind of a special meal and some of those things. So war diaries can be extremely informative. They can give you some really, really valuable insight, and they are available on the National Archives website. So they're really easy to get to. This particular war diary, this entry for October of 1915, and the action that they saw on the 13th, sorry, I said the date wrong. The action that this war diary describes on the 13th of October 1915 has this written description, but it also included something that I've actually never seen before, and I wonder how many of you have, but this one was new to me. So included I'm trying to click and it's not working. There we go. It included the copy of their actual orders for the day. So we don't just get kind of the reaction from the activity, right? The afterthoughts. We also get the actual sequence of events as the commanding officers kind of anticipated it going, right? So we know exactly that the artillery was scheduled to start their bombardment at 12:30 p.m. precisely, right? And then how the sequence of events was supposed to play out for the rest of the day. Like I said, I've not seen this before, but I thought it was a really, really interesting and very telling way to kind of describe you get kind of this firsthand account of like this is what happened and this is how many men we had wounded and killed, but then you get this actual like moment by moment play of how they anticipated the battle going. I think that is a really fascinating contribution to any research story. A really nice addition, of course, to Eli's story, being able to say to his great granddaughter, this is exactly how it played out, or it's how they thought it was going to play out anyway. So that was kind of a neat discovery as well in the War Diaries. So the second entry then was published on the 22nd of January, 1916. Um, so again, we went back to the War Diaries to see what kind of struck us as the most feasible event. The first week of January 1916, the unit was near Posen Alley. There were 5 deaths and 5 wounded, so that seemed like a decent moment to think about. They then move into reserve, and they're in reserve for several days. The 9th and 10th of January, they saw some slight shelling. And then on the 11th, they were actually shelled quite heavily. They're still in reserve, but they're being shelled. There were 3 wounded soldiers and 8 civilians out of the sequence of events from the 9th through the 11th. So really we can kind of think about this 2 ways, right? Option 1 is to kind of go back to the war diary and try and backtrack as I'm showing you now from the date of publication on the newspaper to what you think is kind of the most reasonable and likely set of events that would have resulted in this injury. And as you can see, we just talked to, we found 2 possibilities. The second way to do this and to really actually narrow this down and confirm the dates is to go back to the newspapers. So that's what we did. In the newspaper clipping where we originally identified his injury, if you look at the very top, it actually starts with Tuesday night's casualty lists include 17 officers, 7 of which are killed, 528 rank and file, 114 killed, 272 wounded, 130 Australians of the Mediterranean force, 45 killed, 61 wounded, 24 missing. None of Tuesday's entry says a name. None of it gives any specific names of people who were killed. They have lists of wounded and they have lists of shell shock, but not individuals who were killed. And why is that distinction important? Well, because death records will give us a date. Wounded records do not necessarily. And in Eli's case, we already have his military records and we don't know a specific wounded date. So we know he's wounded, but we don't have enough information here to base a kind of an assumption on or a theory on. So if we expand this article and read the entire entry, we realize, of course, that it's actually much longer. So it includes Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, and so forth. So if we take a look at that, that's the section that we knew about already that we had seen. And then we get Wednesday night and Thursday night's entries. And those days do include names of deceased. So we actually end up learning about Private G.C. Golding of the 7th Gloucesters, and his service number, who was killed the day after Eli was injured. Now, this might all be kind of a little bit morbid and like, oh gosh, this is crazy. It like why, but if when you are seeking out a factual date, you have to use the information that's provided to you. So that's what we end up with, right? We use the events around other people's lives to inform the research that we are actually trying to accomplish. So we look up Private G.C. Golding, and we learn that he is actually George Christian Golding. The service number matches, the unit matches, and we learn that he dies on the 3rd of January. He actually dies at sea, but he is listed the day after. So the circumstances around his death don't matter. It's the date that, well, they do matter. I don't want to say that. The circumstances around his death are not what we're looking for. We're looking for the date. So he dies on the 3rd of January. So we can go back and say that Eli's injury, which happens the day before, happens on the 2nd of January, 1916. And the war diary indicates they are in trenches, fairly heavy shelling, casualties, 3 men wounded. Eli is then one of those 3 men. From here, of course, you can go on to learn all sorts of things, right? There are battle maps and other resources. And I noticed just now in the comments that Ken is sharing a number of those types of resources. Thank you, Ken. Um, it, this type of research just keeps going, right? You can just keep learning about the battle he was in or the unit he served with. Or the circumstances around kind of what led to that battle, the political endeavors, like all of those things kind of can play into it. And you can spend the rest of your life just researching this one battle if you want to. That's up to you. I'll leave that up to you. But really keep in mind that all of these little bits and pieces from documentary evidence can feed into what it is that you're really trying to solve, right? In this instance, it's where and when did Eli's injury take place and when did he lose his arm? So the original question that Lori asked us was about, we think it might have been the Battle of the Somme, but that battle actually takes place the 1st of July through the 18th of November, 1916. So Eli's wound is obtained in January. By the time that battle takes place, he's at Roehampton, he's in England, he's recovering. So he certainly wasn't on the battlefield anymore. He actually spends 286 days in recovery and rehabilitation between the date he was injured and the date he's actually discharged. And that, almost a full year, that just kind of reflects on what we were saying earlier about the impact of the wounded and the limbless as they kind of walked out of the war and into normal life, right back into civilian life, and how that might have happened. The day of his injury, the largest event actually taking place in the war was the evacuation of Gallipoli, which was over 2,000 kilometers away. So, though Eli's injury takes place in a relatively minor little event, right, in the grand scheme of things, but obviously makes all the difference in the world to him. All of this story is wrapped up into a video that we produced. If you haven't seen it, you can find it on our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, all sorts of places. I'm not going to play it. I just want to encourage you to look for it. It's a really interesting story. This is what it looks like when when you're on YouTube or something, and it's called Finding Eli. It just as a note, right? Just to think about how the impact, the long-term impact. He was 18 at his first injury. He was 19 when his second injury occurred. And then, of course, 19 when he lost his arm. 19 years old. He's just a baby. And then he marries and they have children, and he has what appears to be a pretty successful life and a pretty happy life. And he actually ends up serving as an air raid warden during World War II, as does his wife and one of their sons. So really, really genuine heroes, the whole family. I think Lucy, like I said earlier, I think Lucy is just as much a hero as Eli for stepping into this world, right? And having the courage to be a partner to him. I think that's an incredible testimony to her and her personality. All right, so that's the end of our little case study today. I hope it's been helpful and I hope you've enjoyed it. I know there's been some comments, so I'm gonna try and scroll back, and Ellie would have shared all the links that I gave her to share. So hopefully those are helpful as well. Let's see. And then we're going to go back to a few more comments of the week, and then and my timing is pretty good. Okay, so the video link has been shared in the chat in the thread. That's really good. Okay. So a couple comments specific to this. Kim says, I'm struggling with finding my great-grandfather and his time in World War I. Joined the Royal Artillery in 1916, according to his grandson. So yeah, it can be tricky to actually identify the right people in military records, especially if they have a common name or if there's something else obscure. Of course, there's also the fact that Some of the military record collection was destroyed in a fire, so that doesn't help any. But there are a lot of resources on this, Kim. I would invite you to put his information in the Find My Past forum if you're on that group on Facebook, and see if the kind folks in the forum can help you. But give lots of detail, so that they can try and contribute to that process if you're interested in getting some help. Um, Ellie kind of reiterating my tips for you, which is great. Thank you, Ellie. Search newspapers by your military ancestor surname and service number, and do that in two individual searches. Sometimes that is more helpful than combining those. Or use the advanced search on Find My Past newspaper collection to do a phrase search. So you might see, right? You might see Private Collins and then a service number either before or after, and you can kind of expand that phrase so that it broadens the scope, but also keeps it reasonable in terms of your search parameters. So use that advanced search tool. It's really, really good. It's really cool. I love this new hashtag, community assemble. Yes, ma'am. Ellie, thank you very much. Do, do, do. Oh, and Kim shared her details in the thread. So if anybody can help, please do take a look. She has a photo. Okay, let's see. Daphne saying maybe Eli wanted Lucy to have his pension, especially if he thought he might die of wounds. It's totally true. Yeah. If he was fearful of infection, or if he thought that his recovery was not going well for whatever reason, yeah, marry, and so that she is legally obligated. Yeah, definitely. And she also says, what are the keywords to find war diaries on Find My Past? So actually, Find My Past does not have war diaries. They are available through the National Archives at Q, and Ellie has put the link up. And the link will actually take you to a landing page. It describes what they are and how to use them and how to find them. They are available on a couple of other commercial sites as well, but at least one other, but they are free at TNA. And then a couple comments from Ken that I want to share. Ken, if you guys don't know Ken, he's wonderful. He's a really, really excellent researcher in Canada, and he's got a couple things to share with us. So you might find secret operational orders in the war diaries of the Canadian Expedition Force held at the Library and Archives Canada. And and I have found that too. And Ken, I don't want to step out of line because you have more research, you have more experience here than I do, but I have found the Canadian Expeditionary Force records to be a little bit more detailed than the British, especially in terms of his next comment, operational orders, maps, map references, and then you can kind of do that cross-referencing to trench maps. Which may have been digitized at McMaster University. Sorry, I almost said it wrong there. But excellent resources if you are really looking for resources on World War I. Don't forget about the Expeditionary Force from an international perspective. I think a lot of people tend to think it's British Army, so I'm only going to research the British records, but that's not really going to help you. We need to have an open, broad mind when we look at these kinds of things. Okay. Oh, we have a request to share the links on YouTube. I'm not actually even sure if we can do that, but we will look into it, Jennifer, and let you know. Okay, I have 7 minutes left, so I'm going to go back to the question of the week. And let me see. I'm going to try and put it back up on the screen and be tricky about it. Yeah, there we go. Look at me doing stuff. All right. A couple more that we didn't get to earlier. So actually, Ellie bringing up last night's Who Do You Think You Are, which of course I haven't had a chance to see yet because I'm not in the UK, but included Paddy McGuinness. He didn't know the names of 3 of his grandparents. And I think that's actually pretty average for people who don't do what we do, right? I think that's pretty typical. I think it's pretty standard for people to not be able to name all 4 of their grandparents, because as one of the comments earlier, right? Like it was rude to ask for their Christian name. Well, if you only ever know them as grandma and grandpa or nana or whatever you called them, it, as an adult after they've passed away, yeah, you wouldn't think of them as Harley and Elsie. You think of them as grandma and grandpa. So yeah. I think we see that more than maybe sometimes we give credit to. I don't know. Jeff says he started to do a tree in the 1980s and asked grandmother about family, but became very upset when I asked her about it, about her father, so left it. Oh wow, he took his life when she was 14. Yeah, no wonder she got upset. That's tough, right? It's tough. Those sensitive issues. Kim saying I found out my maternal granddad hid a professional boxing career from his wife and children. Only mentioned it casually years later. Okay, yeah, yeah, great. Just this whole other career in life. That's fun. This one's interesting. Rosie, found from researching my paternal grandfather never met, who died before I was born, was a bigamist. Okay. You know what? Genealogy is, you just never know what's going to happen, right? You just never know what you're going to find. Sometimes I get these comments from you guys and I'm not really sure how to react. I don't want to be too blasé about it, too casual about it, but like yeah, I don't know. I found out that one of my so my great grandfather was married twice, and we didn't know that. We didn't know about the first wife. And when I told my dad about some of the things that had happened with that family, he laughed and it was just like, this is crazy. Like, and the rest of my family was like, this is horrible. But here's my, maybe that's where I get it. I'm just maybe too casual about it. Okay. Right. A couple other questions. I'm just trying to find some of the good ones because, well, they're all good. Of course, they're all good. It's hard to choose. Oh, this is really interesting. Sue, have researched all my families as far back as I can, but Irish grandma is a bit of brick wall. She was born in a workhouse, and it was said she was involved with Countess Markovich in the Irish Rebellion, but not found any evidence. I only have the Findmypast workhouse records for her mother, but no other info. That's quite a puzzle, Sue, to be working on. And this followed, this comment is right after Sue's on my screen. Context is so important. And that could not have happened on my screen any better. um, because Sue is going to need a lot of context in order to dig out her grandmother's story. So that is well played, Ellie. Okay, and then we got into a few more military. Oh, this is an interesting thought. There's such an art, for want of a better word, to interpreting records. I think, yeah, that's true. I think to a point. But also, like even just in the comments, there's been some things that I hadn't thought of, right? So Kim saying poor Eli being wounded, although ultimately probably saved his life. And she's right, right? But when I was doing the research, that was one of the things that kind of came to me after the fact. But when I was in the midst of that research process, I didn't really think about that at all. I was just really focused on like his storyline. But yeah, it's a really good point that there is so much to interpret. There's so much to understand. And all of us are going to have kind of our own variety of that, right? Our life experiences are going to inform how we interpret historical records, and that's one of the hard parts about what we do is making sure that we are interpreting in the right way in the right place and time with that historical context really in place and firmly in our minds, because what we think of a record may not be the case at all, right? Because we're informed by modern culture and all of that. All right. So I think this is a great place to leave it, actually. I noted that Ellie did share the links in YouTube. Thank you, Ellie. Really appreciate you. And I just want to thank you all very much for joining us for our first session, our first expert hour. I hope you liked it. My plan is to kind of continue to tell Eli's story in a little bit of different way. So that's probably what I'm going to do next time. But if you want to see something else, please do let us know. And you can always reach us on our social accounts, obviously, but also at support@findmypast.com if you want to reach out that way. And keep in mind, that if you have a specific comment to myself or to Ellie or Liam or Rose, the other hosts on our series, you can send them an email at support and just say, please forward this to Jen or Ellie or Liam or Rose, and that will make sure that your comment gets directly to us. So please do reach out. We really, really want to hear what your thoughts are and if you're enjoying our sessions and how we can make sure that they are great for you. So with that in mind, Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a fabulous weekend. We hope that you have really, really great success in your own research. And we will see you next Friday for our fabulous new sessions with Ellie and Liam.